tell us about yourself and then we'll go from there.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Moira Pena. I'm an occupational therapist in Canada, and I love everything about sensory processing.
Which is for those of us that don't know.
Yeah, so sensory processing is the way that you take in information from all your sensory systems, and there are eight of them, and how you process that information, and then what your behavior outputs are based on that information. And usually, kids and youth and adults on the autism spectrum experience significant sensory processing issues, but also other people, like people with other conditions, as well as typically developing kids, youth, and adults. So it is a topic that I think is interesting to all.
How did you get into this field? Just out of curiosity.
Sure. Well, when I graduated many years ago, so 20 years ago or so, I thought that I wanted to work in the mental health field, and I was really interested in working with women who experience eating disorders. And so I moved to England and I worked in an eating disorders clinic there. It was actually an inpatient unit. And so I work with, I did all kinds of groups and all kinds of interventions. And there was a group of women who just did not fit the criteria for anorexia or bulimia, which is really all about wanting to take less space in the world and wanting to change your body image in a way. But this group of young women, actually, they were just telling me that they experience a lot of issues around managing the sensory aspects of food. So they would say, the food smells so bad, I can't eat it, or it makes me want to vomit, or the texture of that food makes me feel really unwell. So what they were actually telling me was that there was actually something about the sensory experience of eating that was making it very challenging for them to eat. And now I know that those young women were actually on the spectrum, they were autistic. And what they were experiencing was sensory processing issues that really got in the way of their functioning.
So tell us about like the sensory aspects of food and like tips to like help with the sensory aspects of food because I could use that too.
Really? Do you experience issues around managing some foods as well?
Oh yes, smell, texture. Yes.
Right. So that's very interesting. So definitely, like I said, the other populations, like people with CP as well, would experience sensory issue, and it's really around, for example, um, almost like you're feeling it too much in your mouth, and you're having difficulties like mixing different textures, or it could be so you're over responding to the sensory features of food. So that could be the smell, that could be the texture, like the wet. And there are kids that won't touch crunchy foods, they won't chew. They have to have their foods pureed for them to eat. There's also like just the visual presentation of food, and that might be enough for somebody to have a lot of issues around eating. But you can also experience issues around the sensory system called interoception, which is your the information that you get from your inner body. So it's also not unusual for people to actually eat too much because they never get the message that you've had enough. So I remember somebody who said to me, she thought that 4 servings of pasta was actually 4 packages of pasta. And that's what she would eat because she never got those cues that no, she's full. And so when she understood that, that really helped her.
Oh wow, I didn't know that like that could affect your feeling of like fullness too. That,
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
okay. I learned something new. So how was the eating disorder clinic in general? Because that sounded fascinating.
Um, so what would you like to know about it?
Like, what was it like working there?
Oh, I loved it. It was, usually, I mean, this is sort of a cliche, but women who experience eating disorders are, they're usually very smart. They know they have a problem and they're very motivated to work on it. So it was an amazing experience in England because there was a whole team working with these young women and where we're all supporting them in just trying to regain their life back and to actually be able to enjoy life without thinking about food and food calories and all the rest of it. But the interesting thing was that the people who experienced sensory issues only never really cared about the calories. It was really all about the sensory experience. So that's sort of the group that I took to. And then when I came back to Canada, I started working with kids with sensory processing issues and mostly with kids on the autism spectrum.
And tell us like some of the tips and tricks that you've learned from working with kids on the autism spectrum about how to manage like their behaviors.
Yeah, so it's really about us clinicians and parents and about all of us learning to reframe what you see as a challenging behavior. So, you could be seeing a lot of meltdowns and tantrums and but it's really about kids feeling overwhelmed by sensory input. And they actually call it like a sensory overwhelm. It's almost like the way they explain it to me is just it's almost like they shut down because all of the sensory input, like from your vision and the sounds and maybe how things feel, like the clothing that you wear, maybe your difficulties around being able to control your body, all those things just sort of come to a head and you just become overwhelmed and you just shut down. So I think it's very important for us to see and to identify what could be all the triggers to their behavior. Because I think a lot of people think that kids in particular are being manipulative or, they're just doing things on purpose. And that's not the case. I mean, it might be just super challenging for a child to be able to get dressed in the morning to go to school if there is a seam on their socks that's really bothering them. That's all they'll be able to think about. So it's so important for us to be able to identify what the issue is and to do our best to be able to mitigate that issue so that then that person is more able to function and participate in what they want to do.
So how do you know if like a child like is like I don't want to say being manipulative, but like using it to get out of something versus like really experiencing something?
Yeah, so I think it has to do with the intensity of what you see. Like for most people, putting on your socks or your underwear or your clothing, it's really not a big deal. You just put them on. So there is something to be said if your child or if the person is experiencing lots of issues around just getting dressed and it's a like a battle each time and there's a lot of crying and it's almost like this over the top behavior, then you know that there has to be more to the story.
So tell us like some tips and tricks that you can use to like kind of get over those like sensory things.
Well, it's interesting. I think as we do get older, we do become a little bit more accustomed or we know how to predict things that we are sensory sensitive to. But really, I think the trick is in planning and being proactive as much as you can because life is unpredictable, but just being prepared. So if you're going to go onto a restaurant, for example, and you're having issues and you know that you have issues around the way that you process sensory information in your mouth, then you might want to like look at the website of the restaurant you're going to, already choose the food that you're going to try. Maybe you have a plan as to what you're going to eat first on that plate and what the textures are. So, again, just to give you a sense of predictability, so then you're not as anxious as to what's going to happen when you go out. So, the solution is not to avoid um, situations that may cause you to become overwhelmed from a sensory perspective, but it's for you to be prepared and to try as much as possible to know what's going to happen so that you can learn to expect it. And then also to get some help from an occupational therapist to help you in managing some of that sensory input.
What about kids that are sensitive to noise? Like, what can we do?
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that because that is the most common behavior that we see. So, kids who cover their ears with their hands, who run away from the classroom, for example. And if you're an adult, it could just be that you may avoid going into crowded places or places with echoes like gyms or, I don't know, places that just have this sound quality that is just over the top for you. So again, in being prepared for that, you might want to have noise canceling headphones, and these are really cheap now. They're like about $30. You can get them in like your regular stores, and even it's like that those things that construction workers wear, but you could actually just buy ones that don't look as obvious, or even just wear earplugs. And I like earplugs that are flesh colored so it doesn't look different. And then you can cut out the tips so it's in your ear, but nobody else can see it. So there's so many things that you can do to dampen the noise, but then still enable you to do what you want to do.
Tell us about vocal stimming. What is vocal stimming and how do we solve it? This is what you talked about on Loma. So,
I did. Yeah. So that is a very challenging topic when I did that podcast. And because it is the toughest behavior to manage. And what this is this um, uh, people who make sounds with their with their mouths, sometimes very loudly and sometimes ongoing, and it's just all the rest of us trying to figure out why, and what is that person trying to communicate. So what I said in the Loma podcast was that the first thing you need to do is to make sure that the person is not in pain, especially a non-speaking person who is not able to tell us with their words what they're experiencing. So the first thing we need to do is, let's make sure that the person is not in any kind of pain, and then, or like, are they anxious? And so then the noise becomes louder. And then if it's none of that, then we sort of go into trying to figure out why that behavior is happening. And there's many, many different reasons. Um, and it just depends on your own particular situation. So every person is unique, and every intervention is pretty much unique as well.
what are some of the common reasons and interventions?
So I think a common reason that I see is when um, people are being loud because they want to block out the noise in their environment that they cannot control. So by becoming loud, then you're able to block out whatever's happening in terms of sounds in your surroundings. So that could be a reason. Another one that I've seen would be something like is the feeling that that noise gives you. So when you're talking about sensory systems, maybe there is a vibration in the back of the jaw that that person is actually enjoying, and that's why that noise has a particular quality because they're doing something to make those vibrations happen in their this in their inner ear, or it could be their vocal cords, or it could be just the feeling um, um, that they are seeking through that behavior. So that's another, when you become a behavior detective, we're trying to think about what is this person getting out of engaging in that behavior.
There was some medical reason, like what doctor would you start with even to find out if there was some medical reason?
Well, and that's very different, right? So that's also there could be a reason, like you could have like a vocal tic. So it could be something that's involuntary, you have no control over. So it's something that you do constantly. And there's many different kinds of vocal tics. So like throat clearing, or like grunting, or just specific sounds. But that that should be explored with a doctor, like your pediatrician, and then you might get a referral to a neurologist. But again, once you rule that out, then it's really about trying to come up with other reasons that tells you why this behavior is happening. So, and maybe what you can do about it is to offer the person a different way to make noise. And for example, say you go from making a loud noise to actually using a musical instrument, and maybe what you can do is then that person can learn to decrease the intensity and the frequency of the behavior, and then use something that is more functional, like some sort of like a harmonica or something like that. There's also ways that we sometimes recommend for people to see if they would occupy their mouths in different ways. So maybe using things like, we call them jewelry. So it's just like things that you can chew on. It's like jewelry, but you can put your mouth to it, and you can. So again, if you're able to use something else, and then you're not engaging in that vocalization as much.
And I'm sure you can buy all of these things on Amazon, correct?
Yes, they're called, if you look at sensory tools, there are many companies that provide all kinds of super fun sensory tools that you can try. So yeah, absolutely. But jewelry is definitely something there that there are particular companies that I like, but I really like things that look age appropriate, and not as identifiable by other people, but you can still use it in other ways. And in this case, you would use it to chew on or to lick on, um, when you are able to when you want to do something else instead of vocalize.
um, so what companies do you recommend that like provide these toys?
Oh, there's so many. But I do like to sort of support Canadian companies. So I will give you the Canadian ones, but I'm sure there's lots of American ones. But there's one called fdmt.ca. So fdmt.ca. There is toys, tools, and treasures.ca. There is munchables.ca, which is, I love that one, because like if you look at their jewelry, like they have these beautiful sort of tags that you wear in um, what do you call it? Like, oh yeah, like a necklace, but it's actually meant for you to be able to put it in your mouth, and they're just beautiful. So, and there are so many. Like once you start looking into jewelry, I mean, it's endless.
Yes, just Google is our friend. So,
Yes.
um, so is there anything else that you would want to add before we get off here today?
Well, I hope I hope this has been helpful. I guess, have you heard from your audience that they experience sensory issues in any way?
No, I mean, we don't have a large audience yet to get feedback from, so, but I'm sure some of them do.
Yeah, so really the main message here is just to keep in mind that these behaviors are not willful. And that especially if you're thinking about young children, kids do well if they can, not if they want. So it's if something is really getting in the way, there might be a sensory reason for that behavior. So it's just about reframing what we may think of as being willful and challenging behaviors to um, stress behavior or looking at triggers that may be causing it. Because once you get to those triggers, then that behavior may no longer be there.
And where can people find you on social media?
Sure, I'm at Moira Pena underscore OT. So I do post about sensory processing there. I also have a website, moirapena.com. And on my website, there's actually a sensory processing differences toolkit that you can look at, and it gives you all of the information about all of the 8 sensory systems and how it might affect people. And I give you a little, and there's a neuroscientist in that toolkit as well who talks about the neuroscience behind sensory processing differences. So I think that would be quite helpful, and that's on my website.
I will definitely go check that out and I will put it in the show notes so that our listeners can go check it out too.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you guys next episode. Bye, guys.